On the night of September 22, 1983, the emergency alarm system on offshore oil platform 117C triggered at 10:47 p.m. The platform stood 130 miles south of the Louisiana coast in a deep-water lease block south of the Mississippi Canyon, where the Gulf of Mexico drops from the continental shelf into more than 7,000 feet of black water. The alarm was designed to activate under one of three conditions: fire, structural failure, or external impact exceeding 30,000 pounds of lateral force. There was no fire that night. There was no equipment failure. And according to the platform's automated vessel tracking log, there was no ship within 2 nautical miles. What there was, captured on 4 fixed security cameras recording continuously around the platform's support structure, was something that 23 men on the night rotation witnessed from various positions on the rig, something that generated a measured 40,000 pounds of lateral force against a 12-foot steel piling, and something that left 3 teeth embedded so deep in the piling's steel cable braiding that they required hydraulic extraction tools to remove. All 4 security camera tapes were seized by the operating company's corporate security division within 48 hours of the event. The crew were required to sign non-disclosure agreements before they were permitted to leave the platform. The 3 recovered teeth, each between 5.8 and 6.4 inches in length, triangular, serrated, dark in coloration, were logged as debris recovered during maintenance. They have since disappeared. What follows has been reconstructed from the sworn testimony of the platform safety officer, structural damage assessments conducted by a contracted marine engineering firm, automated monitoring data from the platform's emergency systems, an acoustic analysis of the impact event, and the informal accounts of 11 crew members who spoke before their silence was purchased. The internal incident classification created for this event, Code 7, Marine Wildlife Interference, had never existed before that night. It would be invoked again 13 years later at a platform less than a mile away. Platform 117C was what the offshore industry calls a fixed jacket platform, a steel lattice structure anchored to the seafloor by pilings driven 400 feet into the seabed, supporting a working deck 80 feet above the waterline. The jacket legs, 4 cylindrical steel columns, each 12 feet in diameter, descended from the deck through the splash zone and into the Gulf, encrusted below the waterline with decades of accumulated marine growth: barnacles, oysters, anemones, tube worms, and the layered biomass of an artificial reef ecosystem that had been building since the platform was installed in 1971. Between 2 of the jacket legs on the platform's east side, approximately 25 feet above the waterline, a steel inspection deck spanned the gap, an open graded work platform with pipe railings, bolted to both support legs with heavy gusset plates and angle brackets. The crew used it for equipment transfers, boat landings, and routine splash zone inspections. It was accessible from the main deck above by a narrow steel catwalk. The water was visible below through the open steel grating. Carl Hooper was the platform's safety officer. 48 years old, 15 years in offshore drilling operations, former Army combat engineer who had served 2 tours and carried the habits of military documentation into his civilian career. Every incident report Hooper filed was precise, time-stamped, measured, sourced. His colleagues described him as the kind of man who recorded wind speed before recording that a storm had hit. In the years since the incident, his credibility has never been challenged by anyone who knew him. When Carl Hooper described something he observed on an oil platform, other men in the offshore industry take it as fact. His incident report, the original, was removed from the platform's safety log within a week of the event, but Hooper had retained a carbon copy. As was his habit, remains the most detailed account of what happened on the night of September 22nd. 4 fixed security cameras recorded the water surface around the platform's support pilings continuously, 24 hours a day, on VHS tapes swapped each morning. Camera 1 faced east, wide angle, covering the water surface and the baitfish aggregation zone. Camera 2 faced south, mounted at the waterline, covering the gap between the two southern jacket legs. Camera 3 faced west, angled downward toward the pilings and the inspection deck below. Camera 4 was mounted low, at the splash zone on the east side, angled slightly upward, a corrosion monitoring camera positioned to document wave action against the jacket legs. Each camera provided a distinct field of view. Together, they covered the water surface around the platform from 4 angles. What those 4 cameras recorded over the course of approximately 20 minutes has never been made public, but the footage content has been described in detail by Hooper, corroborated by 11 crew members, and referenced in the marine engineering firm's structural damage assessment. According to Hooper's report, the first indication of an anomaly came at approximately 10:15 p.m. Every offshore platform in the Gulf of Mexico creates an artificial ecosystem. The platform's floodlights, burning through the night, attract clouds of baitfish, thousands of small fish schooling in the illuminated water. The baitfish attract jacks and barracuda. The jacks and barracuda attract sharks. The food chain stacks vertically beneath the platform, from the lit surface to the dark seafloor, 400 feet below. A nightly phenomenon the crew called the circus. On a normal night, the water around 117C churned with life from dusk until dawn. On this night, at 10:15, the circus stopped. Camera 1, the east-facing wide-angle, recorded the event in its entirety. The baitfish clouds scattered in a coordinated burst, the entire aggregation moving outward from the platform simultaneously, as if driven by a pressure wave originating from the deep water below. Not scattered randomly, the fish moved in unison, a single organism fleeing in every direction at once. The larger predators followed. Jacks, barracuda, a nurse shark that crew members said had been circling the pilings for weeks. All of them broke toward the surface and then away, clearing the floodlit water in under 10 seconds. In Hooper's words, the light pool went from full activity to vacant in what I estimated at 8 to 10 seconds. I had been on that platform for 3 years. I had never seen the water empty. Not once. In 3 years, there was always something in the light. Always. When the circus stops, it means something has entered the area that outranks everything else in the food chain. The question was what? A marine biologist consulting for the engineering firm that would later assess the structural damage identified this behavior in an appendix to the firm's report. She described it as a coordinated flight response, the instantaneous evacuation of all prey species from the vicinity of an apex predator whose displacement wave alone was sufficient to trigger the stampede. She noted that no species currently cataloged in the Gulf of Mexico was capable of producing a flight response at this radius and speed. The displacement wave that scattered the baitfish implied an approaching body mass far larger than any known Gulf predator. Her observation was included in the appendix. The appendix was removed from the engineering report before it was filed with the operating company. The appendix has never been recovered. For approximately 16 minutes after the circus emptied, the floodlit water around the platform was still. Camera 1 recorded empty water. The crew watched from the observation deck above and from the inspection deck below, where 3 men, a derrickman named Russ Colvin, 12 years offshore, and 2 junior roughnecks, had been conducting a routine equipment inventory and remained at the pipe railing watching the water. At 10:31 p.m., Camera 2 captured the first visual contact. A dorsal fin entered the frame from the south. The image quality was what you would expect from a 1983 fixed position VHS security camera operating under sodium floodlights. Grainy, low resolution, the color bleeding between the orange of the sodium light and the dark green of the water. But the platform's jacket legs, 12 feet in diameter, visible in the same frame, provide an absolute scale reference that no amount of image degradation can obscure. The fin stood nearly 4 feet above the waterline. It was enormous, dark gray, mottled with pale patches that appeared calcified or mineral-stained, and visibly thick and rigid in a way that distinguished it immediately from the curved, flexible dorsal fins of the sharks the crew observed from the platform every night. The leading edge appeared encrusted with barnacle clusters growths that suggested not months or years of accumulation, but something far longer. Water streamed off the trailing edge in heavy sheets as the fin cut through the surface. Behind the fin, a wake spread across the floodlit water, a wide V-shape that flattened the surrounding chop for dozens of yards on either side. The wake told the crew what the fin only hinted at. The mass beneath the surface was vastly larger than the visible portion suggested. Hooper noted in his report that the fin completed 2 full circuits of the platform at a consistent distance of approximately 50 feet from the jacket legs. 2 complete circles. Not passing through, circling. A shark behavioral specialist who later reviewed Hooper's account and the engineering firm's description of the camera footage, off the record, at the firm's private request, provided an assessment that would become one of the most referenced details in the file. He described the behavior as consistent with lateral line evaluation, a sensory process in which a shark builds a spatial map of an unfamiliar object by circling it at a fixed distance, detecting water displacement patterns reflected off the target surfaces. He estimated the circling diameter at approximately 100 feet. He then calculated the implied lateral line range from that diameter and wrote, "The lateral line sensitivity required to maintain evaluation at this radius is consistent with a body length of 40 to 60 feet. No extant shark species approaches this dimension." If the circling behavior documented here is accurately described, the animal responsible is either an unknown species or a species the current taxonomy classifies as extinct. His assessment was provided verbally. He declined to put it in writing. The 3 men on the inspection deck watched the fin pass from 25 feet above the waterline. The pipe railing they gripped was approximately 3.5 feet high. Colvin, the senior man on the deck, stated in his account to Hooper that the fin, as it passed the inspection platform during the second circuit, stood taller than the railing he was holding. He described the wake reaching the jacket legs and lapping against the steel, rocking the inspection deck with a gentle but unmistakable surge that he compared to standing on a dock when a tugboat passes, except there was no tugboat, and the weight came from something moving through the water under its own power. None of the 3 men on the inspection deck moved during the circling. None of them spoke. When asked later why they didn't immediately return to the main deck, Colvin told Hooper, "I don't know. I think we were waiting for it to come back up. I think we wanted to see it again." That was a mistake. At 10:34 p.m., Camera 2 recorded the fin slipping below the surface. The submersion was not sudden. The fin descended smoothly, deliberately, as if the creature had simply angled downward. No acceleration, no turn. The water swirled in a wide circular disturbance where the fin had been, concentric ripples spreading outward, the heavy wake collapsing inward, and then settling. The floodlit water was empty. Hooper's report notes that the interval between the fin's submersion and the impact event was approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds of 23 men staring at empty water. 90 seconds of 3 men on an open steel grating platform 25 feet above a dark ocean, knowing that something larger than anything they had ever encountered was somewhere below them. Colvin stated that he looked down through the steel grating during those 90 seconds. He saw nothing, just dark water, shifting gently beneath the platform lights. He did not leave the inspection deck. He began walking toward the catwalk, only when, in his words, the water below the grating started to move wrong, a bulge, rising, like something was pushing up from underneath. The platform's structural monitoring system recorded the impact at 10:36 p.m. The automated sensors on piling B3, the east side jacket leg adjacent to the inspection deck, registered a lateral force of approximately 40,000 pounds, applied over a contact duration of less than 2 seconds. For context, A supply vessel collision in moderate seas generates between 10 and 15,000 pounds of lateral force. The reading on B3 was nearly 3 times the maximum threshold for a vessel strike. The emergency alarm triggered. The entire platform shook. Crew members on the drill floor, 80 feet above the waterline, felt the impact through the deck plates. A shudder that moved through the platform's steel skeleton from the waterline upward. Among the night crew who felt that impact was a 26-year-old roughneck named Eddie Tron, 3 months into his first offshore rotation, working the night shift on the lower equipment level. He wasn't on the observation deck. He didn't see the cameras. He didn't see the fin or the teeth or the wake. But he felt the platform move, felt it in his boots, through the deck plates. A lateral shudder that no vessel contact, no wave action, and no equipment failure could explain. Everyone felt it. Nobody explained it. The official word that filtered down was vessel contact. A supply boat had bumped a piling in the dark. But Tran checked the sea state report for that night. Calm. He checked the vessel traffic log. No supply boat scheduled. No vessel traffic within 2 nautical miles. He would spend the next 13 years trying to understand what could make a structure designed to withstand a Category 5 hurricane shudder like it had been struck by something alive. Camera 3, the west-facing camera angled down toward the jacket legs and inspection deck, captured the impact itself. The frame shows a massive upward surge of white water against piling. B3, the creature's broad head striking the steel column from below the waterline. Marine growth shearing off in a 6-foot-wide swath, the water erupting into a wall of spray and foam that rose above the inspection deck level. The strike was not a glancing contact. It was direct, forceful, and delivered with the momentum of a body that the structural monitoring data estimates at approximately 20 metric tons moving at speed. A NOA acoustician who was later provided with a partial recording of the impact event, captured incidentally by the platform's alarm system. Audio log analyzed the frequency and decay profile of the impact sound and independently estimated the mass of the object striking the piling at 15 to 20 metric tons. This mass estimate, derived purely from acoustic analysis, was consistent with the structural monitoring data's force calculations and with upper range adult body mass projections for Otodios Megalodon, derived from tooth-to-body length allometric scaling, published in peer-reviewed paleontology journals. 2 independent measurement methodologies, structural force analysis and acoustic impact analysis, arriving at the same mass range. The acoustician's analysis was never formally published, but the numbers exist, and they agree. Camera 3 also recorded what happened to the inspection deck. The creature, after striking piling B3, continued its upward trajectory, whether redirected by the piling contact or driven by its own momentum, and struck the underside of the steel inspection platform that spanned between the 2 jacket legs. The inspection deck was rated to hold 15,000 pounds of static load. The force that hit it from below was not static, and it was not 15,000 pounds. The deck buckled upward from the center. Steel grating panels tore free from their mounting bolts. Pipe railings bent and snapped. The gusset plates connecting the deck to the east side jacket legs sheared, the bolted connections failing under a load they were never designed to absorb, and the east half of the inspection platform dropped, hanging from the surviving west side connections at a steep angle before those connections also partially failed. Equipment racks tore loose and fell into the water. Sections of railing dropped into the dark. The 3 men who had been standing on the inspection deck were no longer on it. According to Hooper's report, all 3 had begun moving toward the catwalk the moment the fin submerged. Colvin's instinct, honed by 12 years offshore, had overridden his curiosity when the water beneath the grating began to bulge. Colvin's account states that he was 3 steps onto the catwalk, gripping the handrail with both hands, when the deck behind him lurched upward and then dropped. He held on. The 2 junior roughnecks had reached the base of the main deck stairway. All 3 men survived without serious injury. The structural damage assessment was conducted 3 days later by a team of divers, deployed by the contracted marine engineering firm. Their report, filed as proprietary by the operating company and never released, documents the following. Scrape marks 6 feet wide along piling B3, consistent with lateral contact from a rough, ridged surface. 3 teeth embedded in the steel cable braiding of the piling's protective sheathing, driven so deep that hydraulic extraction tools were required. Marine growth stripped clean from the piling in a pattern that the firm described as consistent with lateral contact from a large, rigid biological structure, and structural deformation of the inspection deck consistent with an upward impact force significantly in excess of the platform's design parameters. The photographs taken during this assessment, close-ups of the scrape marks, the tooth punctures, the sheared gusset plates, the buckled grating, were filed in the platform's maintenance archive in a steel filing cabinet bolted to the floor of the engineering office on 117C. Those photographs would sit in that cabinet for over a decade. The man who eventually pulled them out already knew what he was looking for. The engineering firm's marine biologist examined the 3 recovered teeth and noted dimensions inconsistent with any living shark species. The largest great white shark teeth reach approximately 2.5 inches. The teeth from piling B3 measured 5.8 to 6.4 inches, triangular, serrated, with a dark coloration that the biologist noted was unusual. She recommended they be sent to a university marine biology department for formal identification. The operating company declined. She further noted that the coloration, while dark, did not display the mineral replacement characteristics of fossilized specimens. The teeth were not fossils. They were fresh. The question of what living animal could produce teeth of this size and morphology was not permitted to be pursued. A materials scientist who later reviewed the engineering firm's data independently calculated the bite force required to embed teeth of that size and density into steel cable braiding at the depth observed, approximately 35,000 pounds per square inch at the point of contact. The estimated maximum bite force of a great white shark, the largest predatory shark, currently recognized by marine science, is approximately 4,000 pounds per square inch. The creature that struck piling B3 delivered a bite force nearly 9 times greater. The tooth dimensions, triangular, serrated, exceeding 6 inches, are morphologically consistent with only one known species in the entire fossil record, Otodus megalodon, the largest predatory shark that has ever lived, an apex predator of the Miocene, whose extinction is conventionally dated to approximately 3.6 million years ago. The coelacanth, a species declared extinct for 66 million years, was discovered alive in 1938. The megamouth shark, an 18-foot deep water species, was entirely unknown to science until 1976. The mesopelagic zone of the world's oceans, the depths between 600 and 3,300 feet, remains the least explored biome on Earth. The Gulf of Mexico, where platform 117C stands, drops to more than 7,000 feet within miles of the continental shelf. But it was camera 4 that captured the image that no one on the platform saw in real time, and that would become the most significant single frame in the entire file. Camera 4, the low-mounted splash zone monitoring camera, was positioned on the east side of the platform at just above the waterline, angled slightly upward to document wave action against the jacket legs. In the moments after the impact, as the creature pulled away from the damaged piling and the destroyed inspection deck, its body passed through camera 4's field of view. The floodlights illuminated the creature's full dorsal surface from above, the broad, blunt skull, wider than the piling it had just struck, the massive body tapering behind it, the thick, ridged hide mottled dark gray with pale calcified patches that gave the skin a texture unlike any modern shark, rough, armored, ancient, as if the creature had spent so long in the deep that the ocean floor had begun to grow on it. Barnacle clusters clung to the skull and along the leading edge of the dorsal fin. The oversized gill slits, 5 of them, each longer than a man's arm, flexed as the creature moved. And then it turned. The creature's head rotated upward. A deep-set black eye, small, buried in ridged tissue behind the skull, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, caught the floodlight. The eye was looking up, looking at the platform, looking at the lights. Camera 4 held the image for approximately 1 second. The creature's face, illuminated from above, the eye directed upward at the structure and the floodlights that had drawn it here. The shark behavioral specialist who reviewed the description of Camera 4's footage noted that the head rotation was not consistent with navigation, prey tracking, or the post-strike disorientation that sometimes follows a collision. The creature turned its head specifically to look upward at the light source. This was active visual investigation of the platform itself, the structure, not the prey around it. The creature was aware of the platform as an object. It knew where it was. The corporate response was total. Within 48 hours, all 4 VHS security camera tapes were transferred to the operating company's corporate security division in Houston. The engineering firm's damage assessment, including the marine biologist's tooth observations and the appendix documenting the baitfish flight response, was classified as proprietary. Hooper's incident report was removed from the platform's safety log. His carbon copy is the only surviving version. The 23 crew members signed non-disclosure agreements with financial penalties for breach. The 3 recovered teeth were logged as debris and entered a chain of custody that terminates in a notation reading, "Disposed per standard protocol." The internal incident classification created for the event, Code 7, Marine Wildlife Interference, was added to the company's emergency response manual. It had no precedent. It was designed for this night and this event. Whether the creature captured on those 4 security cameras was a surviving specimen of Otodis megalodon, a species the scientific consensus declares extinct 3.6 million years ago, or an unclassified deep-water macropredator exploiting the Gulf of Mexico's artificial reef ecosystems, has never been determined, because the company that owned the platform ensured it never would be. But the platform's floodlights continued to burn every night. The artificial reef ecosystem continued to stack its food chain from the lit surface to the dark seafloor. And the filing cabinet in the engineering office on 117C, the one bolted to the floor, the one containing the structural damage photographs, with their images of scrape marks and tooth, punctures and sheared steel, remained exactly where it was. No one touched it, no one thought to, until a safety inspector, who had felt the platform shake at age 26, transferred to the adjacent rig 11 years later, walked into the engineering office and opened the drawer. The coordinates of platform 117C, the lease block south of the Mississippi Canyon, where 4 security cameras recorded something that the operating company classified under a code created specifically to bury it, would surface again 13 years later in a very different kind of incident report. Not a structural impact assessment, not a camera seizure log. A dive abort report, filed by a commercial dive supervisor who watched the encounter happen in real time on 2 monitors in a control room on the surface, and who listened to the voices of 4 trained saturation divers abandon their protocols, their decompression schedule, and, in 3 cases, their careers. The platform was 117A. It stood less than a mile from 117C, in the same deep-water lease block, operated by the same company, anchored in the same water above the same 7,000-foot abyss. The date was January 14, 1996. The dive team went down at 0830. By 11:35, all 4 divers were on the surface, suffering from decompression sickness, and the company's corporate security division had been notified for the second time in 13 years that something had been encountered in the water around their platforms that could not be explained, could not be classified, and above all, could not be disclosed. The same suppression protocol would be activated. The same internal code. Code 7. To understand what happened on January 14th, it is necessary to understand the man who connected it to September 22, 1983. Eddie Tran had been 26 years old on the night platform 117C shook. A roughneck, 3 months into his first offshore rotation, working the night shift on the lower equipment level when the emergency alarm triggered and the deck plates flexed beneath. His boots with a force that the official explanation, vessel contact in calm seas, could not account for. He had checked the sea state report. Calm. He had checked the vessel traffic log. No supply boats scheduled. No vessel within 2 nautical miles. The official explanation was a lie. Not a mistake or an approximation. A lie. And Tran recognized it the way an engineer in training recognizes a failed calculation. The inputs did not support the output. Something had hit that platform, and the company had decided not to say what. Over the next 11 years, Tran built a career in offshore safety inspection while conducting a quiet, methodical, one-man investigation into what had happened on 117C. He accumulated what he could from the margins. Sea state records, vessel traffic logs, maintenance reports from platforms across the same lease block. He asked careful questions of crew members who had been on 17C that night, questions framed as professional curiosity, never as investigation, and assembled a picture of an event that the non-disclosure agreements had fragmented but not erased. He knew about the 4 cameras. He knew about the fin. He knew about the impact on piling B3 and the teeth recovered from the steel. What he did not have was physical evidence. When a transfer to platform 117A came through in 1994, Tran requested it. Not because the position was a promotion. It was a lateral move. Because 117A sat 0.8 of a nautical mile from 117C in the same lease block, operated by the same company. And because the 2 platforms shared a maintenance archive system. Within his first month on 117A, Tran accessed the engineering office filing cabinet that held the archived maintenance records cross-referenced with 117C. In 1983, structural damage assessment was still there. The photographs were still there. Close-ups of the scrape marks on piling B3, 6 feet wide, the steel surface gouged through the marine growth. Images of the tooth punctures in the cable braiding, 3 holes, each surrounded by fractured steel strands. Photographs of the sheared gusset plates, the buckled inspection deck grating, the bent and snapped pipe railings. And the photographs of the 3 teeth themselves, laid on a chart table with a ruler for scale, each one triangular, serrated, dark, and larger than any tooth the marine biology literature attributes to a living species. Tran studied those photographs for weeks. He measured the tooth images against the ruler in the frame. He cross-referenced the dimensions with published data on shark dentition. He could not identify the species. But the photographs confirmed what he had felt through his boots 11 years earlier. Something real, something with teeth that could puncture steel cable braiding, something massive enough to buckle an industrial platform rated for 15,000 pounds of static load, had been in the water around these platforms. And the company had ensured it would never be identified. What Tran did not anticipate, what no one on 117 anticipated, was that the evidence would present itself again. In January of 1996, a 4-man commercial saturation dive team was deployed to Platform 117A to conduct weld repairs on the platform's subsea infrastructure at a working depth of 340 feet. Saturation diving at that depth is one of the most dangerous forms of industrial work in existence. The divers breathe a helium-oxygen mixture pressurized to match the ambient water pressure at depth, delivered through sealed helmets connected to the surface by an umbilical bundle carrying breathing gas, communications, and hot water for suit heating. At 340 feet in the Gulf of Mexico, natural light does not reach. The water is a perpetual green-brown twilight, murky with suspended sediment, Visibility limited to 15 or 20 feet in the beams of the diver's helmet-mounted work lights. The platform's support structure descends from the surface into this darkness. Massive steel columns encrusted with marine growth, vanishing downward into the silt-covered seafloor. The world at this depth is claustrophobic, dark, and silent. The only sound is the diver's own breathing through the helmet regulator. Every commercial saturation dive is documented by multiple recording systems. Each diver wears a helmet-mounted camera, a small unit that records the diver's field of view for safety review and quality assurance. The dive stage, an open steel platform approximately 40 feet wide, suspended from a cable and lowered to a position 30 feet above the working depth, carries a floodlight that casts a cone of visibility downward and a monitoring camera that records the dive operation from above. All voice communications between the divers and the surface pass through a dive-com system that is continuously recorded. Jack Poole was the dive supervisor. 38 years old, 12 years in commercial diving operations. His station was the dive control console on the platform's surface level. 2 monitors showing the feeds. From Diver 1's helmet camera and the dive stage monitoring camera, a COM panel connecting him to all 4 divers, and the controls for the stage winch and gas delivery systems. He could see what Diver 1 saw. He could see what the stage camera saw. He could hear every word from every diver. When the dive team reached working depth and began weld repairs on the platform's subsea bracing, Poole settled into the routine of monitoring that defines the dive supervisor's job. Watching screens, listening to COM, logging progress. The dive proceeded normally for approximately 45 minutes. At approximately 11:20 a.m., Diver 2 reported movement at the edge of his light range. His voice on the dive com was steady, professional, an observation, not an alarm. Dive control, Diver 2. I've got movement out past my light, something large, passing left to right. Unable to identify, Poole acknowledged. Large marine animals near deep-water platforms were not uncommon. Whale sharks, manta rays, the occasional great white were all drawn to the artificial reef ecosystem that accumulates around these structures. At 340 feet, any encounter with a large animal warranted monitoring, but Poole's initial assessment was routine. 30 seconds later, Diver 4, positioned 60 feet away on a different section of the subsea bracing, reported the same thing. Something at the edge of his lights, large, moving. The word Diver 4 used was circling. The same word Carl Hooper had used in his incident report 13 years earlier, describing what the 4 security cameras on 117C had recorded from the surface. The creature maintaining a fixed distance, moving in a deliberate arc around the target, assessing the structure before closing. The same behavior, the same word. 13 years apart. The creature was circling the work lights at the outer edge of the divers. Visibility, approximately 20 feet beyond the reach of the helmet beams, maintaining a consistent distance through a slow, deliberate arc that Diver 4 tracked for nearly 2 full circuits before the creature altered its pattern. A marine biologist who was later consulted off the record reviewed the dive-com transcript and noted that the circling behavior maintenance of consistent distance at the detection boundary was consistent with lateral line evaluation, the same sensory assessment behavior that the shark specialist had identified in the 1983 security camera footage. The circling diameter implied by the divers, visibility range, and the creature's maintained distance was approximately 80 to 100 feet, consistent, the biologist noted, with a lateral line system proportional to a body length of 40 to 60 feet. The same estimate the 1983 specialist had arrived at from the surface footage. 2 independent assessments, 13 years apart, using different evidence, security camera footage, and dive-com testimony, producing the same conclusion about the same animal's body length. Then the creature closed. Diver 1, the team lead, reported direct visual contact. He had been working on a weld joint at the base of one of the platform's jacket legs when the water pressure shifted around him, a displacement that commercial divers describe as a change in the weight of the water, a compression you feel in your chest cavity before you see its source. He turned. The creature was passing through the gap between two platform support pilings, approximately 20 to 25 feet from his position, moving through his workspace with the indifference of something that did not register a human diver as significant. It was not approaching him. It was not avoiding him. It was occupying the space. Diver One's helmet camera recorded the encounter. The flank filled the frame, a wall of hide, dark gray mottled with pale calcified patches, the surface rough with oversized dermal denticles that gave the skin a ridged, armored texture unlike any modern shark. Barnacle clusters and mineral deposits clung to the hide in patterns that suggested accumulation over decades or longer. The body extended beyond the edges of the camera's field of view in every direction, top, bottom, left, right, a wall of prehistoric hide that blocked the ambient water light behind it, casting the diver's side of the water into deeper shadow. The creature kept passing. 5 seconds. 6 seconds. 7 seconds of unbroken hide sliding through the helmet light. No head, no tail, just body. In his written statement, provided to Poole 7 years later for Poole's personal records, Diver One described the experience in terms that echoed the scale without exaggeration. It didn't swim past me. It eclipsed me. I was pressed against the piling, and all I could see was its side. I couldn't see where it started or where it ended. The piling I was holding on to, 12 feet in diameter, looked small. I looked small. Everything looked small. Then the body began to taper. The flank narrowed toward the head. The oversized gill slits came into view. 5 of them, each longer than the diver's arm, flexing slightly as they passed. Then the broad, blunt skull, wider than the piling. And the eye, deep set, black, buried in ridged tissue behind the skull, small and ancient-looking, reflecting nothing, absorbing the helmet light without giving it back. It did not track toward the diver. The creature was looking forward, moving through, indifferent. The eye passed. The skull cleared the gap between the pilings, and the water was empty again. Particles drifted in the displacement wake. Simultaneously, the dive stage monitoring camera, positioned 30 feet above the working depth, its floodlight casting a cone of illumination downward, recorded what the helmet camera could not capture. The creature passed directly beneath the dive stage. Its dorsal surface slid under the camera, the floodlight illuminating the broad back from above, the ridged hide, the mottled calcification, the massive dorsal fin passing through frame. The creature was wider than the dive stage. The body progressively blocked the floodlight as it passed, the edges of illuminated water narrowing around the creature until the frame went dark. For approximately 4 seconds, the dive stage camera recorded near total darkness, nothing visible but the faintest texture of rough hide, inches from the lens, blocking all light. Then the tail section passed, the body tapered away from the lens, and the floodlight returned, illuminating empty murky water and settling particles. The dive stage is a known 40 feet wide. The creature's body eclipsed it entirely, wider than 40 feet when passing directly beneath the camera, cross-referencing the body width with a head-to-tail passage time of approximately 4 seconds. At an estimated speed of 6 knots, the creature's total length was calculated at 45 to 55 feet. On the surface, Poole watched both monitors. He saw the flank on the helmet camera feed. He saw the stage camera go dark and then return. He would later tell a journalist in an interview that was never published, after the journalist was threatened with legal action by the operating company, that the moment the dive stage camera went black was the moment his assessment changed. When that floodlight disappeared, when the camera just went dark because the animal was too wide for the light to get around it, that's when I knew this wasn't a whale shark or a manta or a great white. Those animals you can see around them. This thing was a wall. I've been diving and supervising divees for 12 years. I have never seen anything that could block a 40-foot light. Before Poole could order the ascent, the creature turned back toward the worksite. Diver 3's helmet camera captured the final footage. The broad, blunt snout entered the frame from the right, slowly, with the deliberation of an animal investigating a stimulus rather than attacking a target. The creature was closing on Diver 3's helmet-mounted work light, not on the diver. On the light. The same photic attraction behavior documented by the security cameras on 17C 13 years earlier. The creature drawn to artificial illumination, approaching to investigate at close range. The snout grew larger in the frame. The rough, ridged hide filled the lens, calcified patches, barnacle clusters, the dark nostril pits visible on the underside of the snout, and contact. The snout pushed against the helmet-mounted work light, the housing crushed inward. The dive equipment manufacturer would later analyze the damage and determine that the impact was consistent with a lateral strike from a rounded surface, not a collision with flat platform structure, and that the force required to crush the housing was approximately 800 pounds per square inch. The manufacturer's report included a line that would become one of the most quoted details in the file. This is not a bite. This is a bump. The animal was investigating the light source with its snout. If it had bitten, the helmet would be gone. The helmet camera captured the moment of contact. The rough mottled hide pressed against the lens. The image smearing, the lens cracking, and then static. The camera failed. But the dive-cum audio continued. Diver 3's breathing spiked on the recording. A single word, transmitted from 340 feet beneath the surface of the Gulf of Mexico. Surface. All 4 divers began emergency ascent. The creature did not follow them up. Diver 1's helmet camera, still functioning, recorded its departure, the massive silhouette turning away from the pilings and descending toward the deeper water beyond the platform's foundation, visible in the dive stage floodlight for several seconds before the darkness of the Gulf swallowed it. The ascent was uncontrolled. From 340 feet, standard decompression protocol requires stage stops at multiple depths over a period of hours, a methodical process designed to allow dissolved helium to off-gas from the blood and tissues without forming bubbles. An uncontrolled ascent from that depth bypasses every stop. The consequences are predictable. Medical records, which are the diver's personal property and therefore beyond the operating company's ability to classify, document decompression sickness in all 4 men. Symptoms included joint pain, neurological disturbance, and in one case, Diver 3, symptoms severe enough to require 3 days of continuous treatment in a hyperbaric chamber. 3 of the 4 divers never returned to commercial diving. These are men who had built careers working at 300 feet in zero visibility. Men who had been trained to manage equipment failures, entanglement, loss of breathing gas, and the constant risk of decompression injury as routine professional hazards. They did not quit because of a workplace accident. They quit because of what they saw. The behavioral evidence of trauma, 3 seasoned professionals walking away from their livelihoods, is, in its own way, as compelling as anything the cameras recorded. In the dive control room on the surface of Platform 117A, Eddie Tran heard everything. He was not part of the dive operation. He was the platform's senior safety inspector, and he had been in the control room reviewing maintenance documentation when the dive-cum erupted with Diver 2's initial report. He heard movement at the edge of my light. He heard circling, the word that connected everything, the word that Hooper had used in 1983. He heard Diver 3's single word, surface, and the controlled urgency in Poole's voice as the dive supervisor talked the team through an ascent that both men knew was happening too fast. And he knew. He had spent 11 years pursuing this answer. He had transferred platforms to find it. He had pulled the photographs from the filing cabinet and studied the scrape marks and the tooth punctures and the sheared steel. And now he was hearing, through a dive-com speaker in a control room, the same creature that had shaken 117C in 1983 encounter 4 men at 340 feet on the adjacent platform. Tron went to his office that evening. He opened the folder where he kept the 1983 structural damage photographs. The photographs he had recovered from the 117C maintenance archive 2 years earlier. He laid them on his desk beside the dive team's preliminary incident report and the descriptions the divers had provided in their debriefing. The descriptions matched. The same mottled dark gray hide with pale calcified patches described independently by crew members on the surface in 1983 and by divers at depth in 1996. The same oversized dermal denticles, rough, armored, ridged, the same deep-set black eyes buried in tissue behind the skull, and the same behavior, the detail that, for Tran, sealed the connection beyond any reasonable doubt. In both incidents, separated by 13 years, the creature exhibited identical behavioral patterns: attraction to artificial light sources, circling investigation at a fixed distance before closing, and active engagement with the platform infrastructure itself, not just the prey ecosystem around it, but the steel structures and the lights that crowned them. The creature had been coming to these platforms for at least 13 years. It knew they were here. It had integrated them into whatever cognitive map it used to navigate the deep water above the Mississippi Canyon. Tran wrote his internal memo that night. The memo connected the 1996 dive abort to the 1983 platform impact using the structural damage, photographs, the dive team's descriptions, and the behavioral pattern analysis. It concluded, whatever this is, it is attracted to the lights. It has been coming to these platforms for at least 13 years. It knows they're here. The same light attraction and circling investigation behaviors are documented in both incidents. The physical descriptions are consistent across surface observation and underwater encounter. This is not 2 incidents. This is one animal, or one population, using this infrastructure as a feeding ground over a span that exceeds a decade. The memo was intercepted by corporate security within 48 hours of its submission. The same security division that had seized the 4 VHS tapes from 117C in 1983. The same suppression protocol was activated. Code 7. Marine Wildlife Interference. All dive footage. Diver 1's helmet camera, Diver 3's helmet camera, recording up to the moment of failure, and the dive stage monitoring camera was classified under Code 7 and transferred to the company's Houston headquarters. The dive-com recordings were classified. Pool's dive log and incident report were copied by corporate security. Pool, following the precedent set by Carl Hooper 13 years earlier, retained his own copy. Tran was transferred to an onshore facility within the month. He took his copies of the 1983 photographs with him. The company that operated platforms 117C and 117A had now suppressed 2 encounters, 13 years apart, at platforms separated by less than a mile in the same lease block, using the same internal classification code, a code that had been created specifically for the first event and that no one had expected to use again. Code 7 had been designed to bury a single incident. It was now burying a pattern. And a pattern, once established, demands a question that no suppression protocol can answer. If the creature has been visiting these platforms for 13 years, how long has it been down there? The Gulf of Mexico's deep water oil platforms were first installed in the late 1940s. Their floodlights have been burning every night for over 70 years. The artificial reef ecosystems they create, the stacked food chains from surface to seafloor, have been attracting prey for longer than anyone on any platform has been alive. The creature that struck 117C and investigated the dive team on 117A did not discover these structures in 1983. It was already there. The accumulated evidence, assembled from Carl Hooper's carbon copy incident report, the platform's automated structural monitoring data, the marine engineering firm's proprietary damage assessment, the NOAA acoustician's independent mass estimate, the shark behavioral specialist's lateral line analysis, the dive equipment manufacturer's impact assessment, Jack Poole's retained dive log, the medical records documenting decompression sickness in 4 commercial divers, and Eddie Tran's 13 years of investigation converges on a set of conclusions that the operating company has spent 4 decades ensuring no one could publish. Something lives in the deep water above the Mississippi Canyon. Something with a body mass between 15 and 22 metric tons, confirmed by structural force analysis, acoustic impact analysis, and visual observation at depth. Something with teeth that exceed 6 inches in length, embed in steel cable braiding, and match the morphology of Otodus Megalodon, a species the fossil record declares extinct 3.6 million years ago, but whose tooth dimensions cannot be attributed to any living species. Something that has learned to associate platform lights with prey concentration, that circles its targets before closing, and that has been returning to the same structures for at least 13 years, and likely far longer. Something that, when it encountered 4 men at 340 feet, did not attack them. It investigated them. It bumped a light. And then it left. Whether this creature is a surviving population of a species that science declared extinct millions of years ago, or an unclassified deep-water macropredator that the Gulf of Mexico has kept hidden in 7,000 feet of unexplored water, exploiting the offshore industry's infrastructure the way its ancestors may have exploited seamounts and hydrothermal vents, has never been determined. What has been determined is that the evidence exists. 4 security camera tapes from 1983, 3 dive camera recordings from 1996, dive cum audio, structural monitoring data, acoustic analysis, photographs of teeth embedded in steel, medical records documenting the physical aftermath of a panic ascent, an engineering assessment that describes contact with a large, rigid biological structure, a behavioral analysis that connects both incidents across 13 years, and a classification code, Code 7, Marine Wildlife, Interference, that was created to ensure that none of this evidence would ever reach a marine biology department, a university laboratory, a scientific journal, or the public. Every piece of this evidence was documented. Every piece was logged. Every piece was filed. And every piece was buried by a company that calculated the cost of disclosure and decided that silence was cheaper. The platforms are still there. The floodlights still burn. The food chain still stacks. And somewhere in the dark water above the Mississippi Canyon, something is still circling. If you've seen something from a platform, from a vessel, from a dive, something in the water you couldn't explain, something that didn't fit any species you know, tell us in the comments. Because the evidence doesn't stop accumulating just because someone stamps it Code 7. Subscribe to Maritime Incident Files.